Welcome everybody here. Welcome also everybody at home. I know there are a lot of people watching online. My name is Patricia Pistos. I work at the University of Amsterdam and will be moderating today. And I would like to start with a quote. I don't believe that pudding ever was cooked. In fact, I don't believe that pudding ever will be cooked. And yet it was a very clever pudding to invent. What did you mean what did you mean it to be made of? Alice asked, hoping to cheer him up, for the poor knight seemed quite low-spirited about it. It began with blotting paper, the knight answered, with a groan. That would be very nice, wouldn't be very nice, I'm afraid. Not very nice alone, he interrupted quite eagerly. But you've no idea what a difference it makes mixing it with other things. You recognized Alice and Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. This is the opening motto of Blotter, the book that will be our hero central stage today. Blotter is a book about LSD blotters written by Erik Davis. Erik will, I will introduce him in a minute. He will speak about the book and the making of the book for about half an hour. Then we have a Q&A. And then we will move to a panel with Visser and Erwan Roux, who are also both here. There are, famous blotter makers in Amsterdam. But they will also be properly introduced during the panel. Then there will also be a Q&A, and at the end there will be a surprise. Yeah. So, now the proper introduction. Yeah, we'll, what kind of pudding we will get. Erik Davis is an author, an award-winning journalist, and a scholar based in San Francisco. His wide-ranging work focuses on the intersection of alternative religion, media, psychedelics, and popular imagination. He is the author of, amongst others, High Weirdness, Drugs, Esoterica, and Visionary Experience in the 70s, highly recommended book, and many other books, but also the author of a celebrated cult classic, Technosis, Myth, Magic, and Mysticism in the Age of Information, which had several reprints and re-editions and is still in print and still a classic and read a lot, or read again a lot, I would say. His writings can also be found on the online publication The Burning Shore. And of course, he's the author of the book that we are talking about tonight, Blotter. And Erik, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Patricia, and thanks everyone for coming. I'm sorry to say that books are not going to be available at the moment, though this is one. They are real. They do exist in three-dimensional space-time. Here, if you want to see the picture a little bit better, there we go. However, Kokopelli has put in an order. So if you're a local, just kind of swing by, put your name on a list, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going, since I only have, usually I kind of take my time and goof around with all of this material, but we have a really a nice action-packed evening, so I'm just going to dive into the book. So the book begins with this man. His name is Mark McCloud. And in the early 1980s, Mark McCloud, a sort of freak, punk in San Francisco, he loves subcultures, so he enjoyed them all. Started collecting street LSD blotter. He kept a little stash going, put it in the refrigerator, and over time he developed quite a collection. At some point he started to put them behind framed glass, and then in the late 1980s he exhibited them in an art space. This led to a larger show in New York City. And then out of his presentation, he actually met some LSD blotter makers and other LSD folk. And within a short period of time, he began making it himself. So he spent the 90s producing blotter for the underground, which led to 2 arrests, luckily neither of which led to anything. And a few years ago, I've known Mark for a very long time, and so he has this enormous archive of LSD blotter, both more recent Vanity Blotter and Street Blotter. And his doors have been open for a while. He calls his collection the Institute of Illegal Images. And people come by and they visit and they look at the material, and it's pretty open. There's been journalistic articles since the 90s, but I was like, Mark, why hasn't anybody written a book? And he goes, I don't know, dog, why don't you do it? And I'm like, okay, sure. So I did it, and so that's what we'll be talking about tonight. All right, here we go. We got to start with the daddy. So before we talk about the media of blotter art or blotter, it's when it becomes art is part of the story, but we might not have time for that. We got to start with just some things about LSD, because LSD is a peculiar molecule in many ways. And there's 2 important facts about acid that impacts the blotter. One is that it's rare and usually hazardous to try to take LSD in its pure form, that is, as a pile of crystal. And maybe you can put it in solution and water down the solution enough that you can control your dosage that way. But mostly what ends up happening is once that it's in solution, people take that solution and put it on another carrier medium. Notice the word, carrier medium. That's how the legal world refers to the body of the drug. That's not necessary for the drug. And in the 60s, there were all sorts of different things that people would put liquid LSD on. But before, this was the first carrier medium for LSD, which was the Sandoz product. It came in these little glass vials. There were a couple of different methods. They had press pills, they had powder, and they had these little batches of 25 milligrams, still quite a considerable load. So that was this sort of straight world way to package and mediate LSD. The underground way, this is a nice, the title of this book, because the cover actually refers to 2 different ways of distributing LSD. One is in Kool-Aid in a punch bowl, so you have a punch bowl and it's like, pour it on in, kids, let's have a party, which was the Merry Pranksters approach. But then the cover of the book gives us the famous sugar cube, which in the 1960s was a famous carrier medium that kind of went out of style over time because it's a kind of difficult way to carry it. It crumbles, et cetera, et cetera. So by the end of the 1960s, most LSD was pressed into pills or tablet forms, different colors, different shapes. And then in the early 1970s, there was also the rise of gelatins, which were often clear, transparent, sort of plasticky gelatins. There were also a very famous series of pyramids that came and microdots that came out of the UK. But most of my story is centered in the West Coast. So this leads us to blotter. So people use blotting paper and other kinds of paper as a way to hold LSD probably back to the 1950s. But at some point, someone was like, well, we can make this a little bit more efficient. Because usually you're sitting there, and if you want to dose a piece of paper, you're sitting there with an eyedropper, and you're like putting a single drop at each one, and you're trying to make the eyedropper be kind of the same, but of course you're not, and the drop doesn't fall exactly on the piece of paper. Then you have a piece of paper that has all these dots on it, which begin to disappear, and it's not exactly a totally controllable medium. So in the late 1960s, this fellow named Erik Davis and his compatriots, one of whom was from MIT, I believe. Actually, the MIT guy might have been the chemist. There's some new information that's coming in about Ghost. Anyway, they developed a machine, and the machine had 100 needles, like a 5 by 20 grid of needles, and you would take the whole thing and dip it into the LSD solution, and then pick it up and move it over, and then it would impress itself on a little 5 by 20 card, and that 5 by 20 card then would have 100 hits laid out on it, and those would show up under color because they were using litmus paper. So back in those days, when you'd get like a sheet like that, you'd have to cut it yourself. And the single drops in Erik Ghost's batch, each drop was 1,000 mics. So you cut out the drop, and then you were, of course, expected to further cut it down, which some people did and some people didn't. This was the 60s. So that was kind of the first sort of industrialized, move towards blotter. But it obviously raises some problems. How do you control for it? How do you define where a individual hit is? So in the early 1970s, people started to print out grids. And the grids gave a nice little way to say, okay, inside each grid is a drop. People are probably still doing it by hand. And this is a really early piece that also shows like this kind of desire. Like, do we like this guy? I don't know. We like this guy, but like you could just sell the LSD on a gridded piece of paper. You don't need to draw a superhero on it. It's completely unnecessary, and that's one of the marvelous things about blotter art that's really important to recognize. You don't need the images to sell the LSD, and in fact, some makers prefer blank blotters, and some consumers prefer them. So there's always been blank blotter in the mix. When I was a teen acid head, most of the blotter we ate was blank. That was just the blotter we got. So in a way, the art is just purely excess. It's just there for whatever it does, and it does a lot of different kinds of things. And you'll see this introduces, Captain L introduces a kind of superhero motif that'll run throughout the blotter story. Here's an example of a handmade or hand-adapted perfing machine, because at a certain point in the 1970s, we don't know who or even where this came from. At least Mark doesn't know. I certainly don't know. Someone was like, well, look, yeah, we can print it with grids and then get the acid heads to like get out the scissors and cut out the blotters, but why don't we just actually impress the grid in the paper through perforation, so then we don't have to draw the grid, and then we're controlling for the distribution of an individual hit. So that took off. And then you have this problem of how do you do that? And there were a lot of funny kind of DIY ways that people would perforate their blotters, because you can get them perforated at a print shop, but it gets kind of obvious after a while what you're doing. So then people would make their own perf boards. Sometimes they would take the little teeth on a aluminum foil box that tears off the aluminum foil, and they would just remove those and put those down on a board, and then you had like a decent perf board. So there's a whole kind of DIY art of developing these things. And that's a very interesting thing about blotter in general, is that unlike tablets or a lot of other formats that drugs get distributed in, the whole mechanism, the whole art of it is purely from the underground. It's just something that comes up from the heads and the acid folk. Here's sort of an early, this one's a little bit later, but it introduces the fact the first blotter is, the first printed blotter comes with R. Crumb's Mr. Natural on it. We don't know that. There might have been earlier ones, but the first one that I could find any record of. And for me, it kind of fits. Because Mr. Natural, on the one hand, he's a holy man, right? I mean, he's like, he's transcended the normal workaday world. He's wearing robes. He's free. He's barefoot. He's smiling. He's mystical. He's a guru. So it's kind of the upbeat, mystical side of LSD. But he's also kind of a rake. You don't really trust him. He's a bit snarky. His morals are a little questionable, and this suggests the kind of prankster, trickster side of the LSD consciousness. And a lot of the blotter art kind of pulls between these sides. Is it like sort of sarcastic and funny? Is it kind of beautiful and mystical? And it plays with that tension very much. Another way of thinking about it from a media point of view is that LSD Blotter is just another example of a countercultural print medium. And there are many important ones. So you have underground comics, you have alternative newspapers, and you have, of course, the famous psychedelic posters, which were made not just in the Haight, but all over, including here in Amsterdam. And so thinking about it in terms of how did print, and particularly the facility of offset printers, which sort of become available sometime in the early 1950s, and then they get distributed out, and then you can kind of get them, that allowed a kind of alternative print world to open up. And while we think of underground comics or newspapers or posters as like a medium, we don't really think of Blotter that way, but in a way it's an extension of the same thing. And part of my proof is this prophecy. So this was a San Francisco poster made by Kelly, Mouse, and Griffin in 1967 for an event. And they took Lon Chaney's head, the main head thing, and then they turned it into this grid that looks just like a blotter grid. And in fact, when this poster came out, they didn't just release the large-scale posters, they also made these kind of handbills. So you had that image on a handbill, and the rumor was that all the heads had an individual dose in them. So there's this weird kind of slippage between this sort of a cousin media art and Blotter itself. This is an example of a piece that's drawing from a Rick Griffin underground comic, so I'm kind of showing the connection. This is a piece that's drawing from Mouse and Kelly album covers, which is another kind of media of countercultural, and then later sort of commercial countercultural print media. Here's another example of the way in which kind of mediated images and the materials themselves kind of loop together. One time, Owsley Stanley, who's a famous early 60s chemist, who's one of the first people to famously make LSD, in the underground, he had his new tablets, but he didn't have a name for them. Previous names had referred to commercial detergent. Blue Cheer was one of his items. And he saw the poster for the event that he was making acid for, because acid makers sometimes would make a batch designed for a particular event. And in this way, it kind of shared some of the logic of those rock posters. Because you think about what's a rock poster, or like a Hate Street psychedelic rock poster. It doesn't show the band. It shows some fantastic image, and then it tells you that in the future there's something happening that may have something to do with this fantastic image. So it's like a promise of a future experience, a future marvel, like a little sort of gesture towards it. And in a way that in this Griffin piece, Owsley's sitting there looking at this gesture, and he looks at the lightning bolts, and he goes, okay, that's what it is. It's white lightning. And from that point on, the lightning bolt becomes a kind of somewhat esoteric sign within Blotter and psychedelic iconography in general for LSD, which is why it's here. So if you've always gone, why is there a lightning bolt in that skull and roses? It's probably one of the most famous logos, most powerful logos to come out of the counterculture. That's why. And then here is a good example of the kind of wit and grace, I would even say, that can go on in some of these pieces, where it's very simple, and yet it has this just excellent kind of gesture towards simple graphic elements that produce this dimensionality. Almost, it has a very street art feel. But then the image is from a superhero. It's from Shazam, so you'd recognize that. Oh, I read those when I was a kid. Okay, it's like superpowers. But it's also a lightning bolt. It's also a wink-wink reference to acid. And a lot of blotters have these layers of witty self-reference to them. So it's a very self-conscious kind of medium. These are just some examples of the kinds of things, because I remember what I said. So the images aren't necessary. They're just there. They're gifts. They're wonders. They're jokes. They're badges of identity. They function in a number of really different ways. This one is clearly a magical sigil. And indeed, the ink that this one was printed in itself had the acid in it, which is not the normal way to do it. And it was on the reverse, it was in the reverse color, so it was evenly dosed throughout. I should mention, by the way, that as Blotter became the dominant medium of distribution of LSD, which so happens in the late 70s, early 80s, there's another technical revolution that's happened that's as important as perforation, which is that people realize you don't need to sit there with an eyedropper and drop each individually. You can soak the whole piece of paper, and if you're good at it, you can actually measure exactly the absorption rate of your paper, and you can know that I can put X amount of LSD solution into a bag and stuff in 100 sheets, and they will absorb evenly. So it became, again, a way to scale up the production of the distribution device. Just a beautiful piece, a meditation on the sort of art of the copy, that drives itself through this medium. It's like Andy Warhol's soup cans. There's something about the modern industrial shtick of the copy that then gets reproduced in blotter and played with in many ways. And that's one of the things about acid that makes it so different than all the other psychedelics, is that it's absolutely embedded inside modernity. And the only way to move through it, even if it's the most sacred molecule on the planet, you got to get there through this sort of irony and mediation and relationships with the CIA and with psychiatry, and it's embedded in all of these complex elements of the modern world. We can't fantasize that it exists in some kind of indigenous outside. And so that humor and that irony and even those contradictions show up in some of the pieces. A lot of the blotter arts are appropriated. This is a classic image from the late 1970s. And just to show you how far people would go to make the packaging fun, when again, it wasn't necessary for the point of view of profit. This is how if you bought a gram of Mickey, which meant 10 100-hit sheets, you would get this. So the sheets would come wrapped up inside the gold foil that had another little sticker on it that said Sandoz. It was really good LSD. And that would be inside of this case with this other case on top of it. Is this necessary? No, it's not. That's not what's driving this. It's more like a gift. The other thing that's funny about acid is there's sort of I'm running out of time, so I got to go quick. There's a kind of basic stories like back in the 60s, it was really great, it was so clean and sacred, and everybody had these amazing experiences. And then in the 70s, things get kind of gnarly, and the drugs aren't as good, and like the spirit's gone. And then by the end of the 70s, it's just hedonism, and so that's sort of like a kind of old hippie myth. The way to talk about it is that blotter doesn't take off until the end of that story, until the late 70s. And the 80s and the 90s are the glory years of blotter, which means it's the time when acid isn't really culturally visible in the way it was in the 60s and early 70s, but it doesn't go away. Everybody's still taking it. The punks are still taking it. Industrial people are still taking it. Goths are taking it. Neo-pagans are taking it. Revolutionaries are taking it. Anarchists are taking it. But it ends up carrying these different meanings because it's like a post-hippie situation. So here's some examples. RKL is a Rich Kids on LSD, which is a Southern California hardcore band. And, of course, Ozzy Osbourne needs no introduction. Some other classic 80s blotters, of course, Subgenius on the left, Conan. And now I want to quickly highlight two excellent particular artists. This guy's a queer San Francisco blotter artist named Grandpa. He was friends with Gilbert Shelton, who invented the rainbow flag, who also was on acid when he invented the idea of the rainbow flag. By the way, he's at a party, it's like glitter everywhere, and he's like, rainbow flag! And so that's, every time you see that rainbow flag, go, LSD. Queer LSD. And so here's a blotter that was inspired by that. And then here's a really marvelous piece also by Grandpa, where he kind of plays this sort of a village people situation of, please notice the leather daddy next to the cowboy. Here's another piece that really communicates this kind of joyful, cartoony, playful vibration. Dancing test tubes, those are all test tubes. But this was itself another one of these clever references to a well-known icon in the Bay Area, which was the logo for the PharmChem Research Foundation, which was the first outfit to allow for public testing of drugs in the United States in the early 1970s, until they eventually forced them not to do it anymore. So everybody knew about the dancing test tube there. Now we're going to shift a little bit to the European scene. This is a really, really well-known piece by a British through West Coast hippie land, through Europe, through Goa, character of great renown named Acid Erik. And he came up with this idea of honoring Gorby, I think just after the wall, I believe is the story. There's more information about this remarkable piece in a panel afterwards, if you have time to come up and take a little look at some of the sources, and you can see a picture of Acid Erik. But the actual execution of this was by our friend Ed Visser, who we will speak to in a moment. So, and I'm going to show some of his work. I'm not going to talk about it too much because maybe he can talk about it, but I just want to show some of his really marvelous pieces. One of my great joys in this book is that it wasn't until the very end, where we were actually wrapping it up, that I got in contact with Ed, and it was like, oh my God, I got to get him in this piece. And so I was able to tell a little bit of his story. I wish I had time for more, but here's some of the pieces. I love it because it has a different vibe. I don't want to say it's a European vibe, but it's a different vibe. This, okay, is kind of a European vibe, so, then I can say that. And that was good. It was a very intentional on his part to widen the cartoon vocabulary from the States. This is a wonderful piece. People are like, oh, he's Dutch, it must be Van Gogh. And he's like, nah, it was a card I saw. It's cool. I thought I'd use it, That comes up a lot, too. There's tension. Oh, there's deep meaning in the images of the blotter. And you talk to the blotter makers, and they're like, well, we just kind of took it from a book. We had some clip art that day. Don't make a big deal about it. A very well-known piece. I suspect some of you in the audience recognize this. Little bit more on the 90s. I'm going to go fast now just to show you some of these pieces. This is an early use of blotter as a kind of art form to make a joke about in the CD cover for Plastic Man's Sheet 1, a total classic minimal techno from the early 90s. This is an Alex Gray piece that was famously laid on by Mark McLeod, who had purchased the painting from Alex, and didn't tell him about it when he put it on the LSD. This was well known in the parking lot scene of the mid '90s Grateful Dead, which, by the way, was the main mechanism for the LSD trade in the United States. Not just the low-level dealers, like you could go to a Dead show and you could find somebody in the parking lot who would sell you some LSD, maybe a sheet, maybe 10 strip, whatever. But actually upper-level, higher-level dealers and makers and chemists would use the craziness of the Dead scene to sort of disguise their much more significant acid behavior. We're modernizing the zone. We got the 21st century obsession with the brain in this great early 2000s piece. And now we shift into we're just going to go through very quickly a set of images that are so-called vanity blotter. And that's the last kind of idea I'll introduce, which is that around the late 1990s, people started to print blotter with the purpose of not dipping it in LSD, but instead using it as just an item of trade, a collectible item, sometimes signed by acid luminaries or other psychedelic figures, and then eventually becoming, in a way, an art form of itself. Sometimes people would take images they developed elsewhere and just make a blotter run, but sometimes people would specifically design their images for blotter, and this is one of the kind of breakout early hits. This captures some of the post-hippie, lowbrow, sort of sarcastic edge, which is there all along, but becomes more flourishing at this point. It's actually quite a lovely image. This is, again, like a kind of, more scratchy Michel Basquiat style. And a lot of the images inside of this, you'll see the Mickey in the middle, a lot of the images are themselves drawn from other blotters. So it's kind of that self-referential loop done in a really beautiful way. This is by LSD World Peace is his moniker. And the vanity form also becomes a way of remembering acid history, kind of memorializing elements that are otherwise kind of elusive. So this is anybody recognize this guy? This is an illustration of Nick Sand, who is another one of the great classic acid chemists behind the famous formulation Orange Sunshine, which is my favorite LSD brand name. Orange Sunshine. It's like some kind of like mystic California bubblegum. It's just the best name, Orange Sunshine. Anyway, so this is like a way of honoring a fairly obscure figure, but a very forceful personality, and arguably, probably made more acid than anybody else. This memorializes the famous no-hitter that Doc Ellis pitched in 1970 when he woke up that morning, dropped a tab or two, and then got the call that he was going to pitch. So he went and pitched. He was a pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates. They were playing the Padres in San Diego, and then he pitched this famous no-hitter. And if you don't know baseball, no-hitters are quite rare. It says a lot about a pitcher when they can pitch a no-hitter. We don't really know whether it was because it was so erratic that everyone was terrified, or that he was like absolutely on point. But it's a key moment in acid history for two reasons. One, it's a key moment in black acid history, and there's a whole world of black and brown psychedelia that we don't hear enough about, that has, its heroes and fools and villains and wizards. And the other reason is that LSD has a really important relationship with physical performance that we don't talk about. We think about all the psychological effects and the sacred and this and that, and dancing maybe, but it's quite a performance enhancer in certain circumstances. This is just a piece by my friend Patrick Turk. And this final one, because we can't escape our political reality, I had to include, so we'll notice who we have here at the bottom. We got Mr. T and Mr. P and Mr. P, I guess you'd call him. And this came out of the artist's actual vision. She's on ayahuasca. She sees Trump and Putin climbing through the desert and gaining wisdom through the indigenous medicine. And she was taking a painting class from, her name is Stella G, was taking a painting class from Alex Gray. And she's like, Alex, I don't know what to do with this image. I mean, it's kind of weird. And he's like, you got to paint it. If they give you the image, you got to paint it, and then they'll give you more. And if you don't, they'll stop. And she's like, okay, I guess I'll paint it. So I think that's where I'm going to end, which is good because I'm just only a little bit before time. So what I want to do now is open it up for just sort of 10 minutes of questions before we go to our panel there, if there are questions. Any questions? Any questions out there? Any come? There we go. Here we go.
Dr. Davis, thanks for a fantastic presentation. It was wonderful. I can't believe you fit all of that in 20 minutes. My mind is blown. About your book, it looks like a fantastic text. I haven't looked at it myself, but how could it not be frustratingly incomplete by virtue of the fact that most of the acid was eaten?
Yeah.
What story? How can you tell a story?
One of the jokes that I actually just steal from Mark. It's a Mark McLeod line, and I just simply steal it without crediting it to him in the book. I told him I was doing this. Is that because of that reason? Because a lot of it's gone. Because acid history is impossible to get to the bottom of. It's filled with veils and rumors and lore, intentional obfuscation, scrambled memory. It's very difficult to access the kind of underground history of LSD. That for those reasons, even though in a way it's the untold story, it's kind of the untold story untold once again. So it's like, in that sense, it's scraps and stories and fragments. I'm just glad that I was able to talk to a number of people who were really deep in the trade. And in addition to Mark's collection, the other major source was a DEA publication called Microgram, which tracked street drugs and the chemical analysis of street drugs from the late 1960s. And indeed, the name of the journal is based on an acid. This also often had reproductions of street blotters. So we have a lot of images that we don't have the actual blotter copies of, but we know what they looked like. So between all of that, there are thousands of examples over the years of the different images. So it's not complete, but it's pretty good. You had a question?
With so much emphasis on plant medicine like ayahuasca or psilocybin, acid's kind of gone away a bit, but do you see it swinging back, like all things kind of come back after a while?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I can't say whether I see it swinging back statistically, like whether I feel like more people are doing it or I hear more about it or whatever. I don't know. I think it's very hard to get a sense of what's going on with drugs these days, because it's just so complicated and it's so exploded and it's so multi-level, mainstream, underground, global. The darknet is huge. There are, like thousands of new molecules that people are taking. It's really hard to get a handle on. So I don't know about that. I do know that that it is true that some people actually don't even really want to deal with LSD. One guy I met who was like, yeah, I think, wasn't it kind of like a mind control thing? So it was like it has like a bad rap because of this modernist history. And if you're taking psychedelics because you want to escape modernist, your contemporary subjectivity, you want to believe or hope or hold out the faith that you can plug into some more organic or some kind of cosmic or natural perspective that's outside of human civilization, well, then taking a plant medicine makes way more sense, sort of mythically, whereas taking this lab compound that was used by the CIA and bound up with all this story, it doesn't really have that charisma anymore. But for me, that's actually a bonus. That actually means it's, in a weird way, it's more wild, because it doesn't really fit into the dominant narratives of why people are taking medicine, which is all about healing and recovering from our consumerist ways and seeing the big picture and plugging into nature and having nature come in and heal us and connecting with ancestral wisdom. And my view as an acid historian is like we have our own ancestral wisdom. It's just the ancestors haven't been around that long and they're really kooky, and you might want, you got to take them with a grain of salt. But these are our ancestors. Like Doc Ellis to me is an ancestor. And I say it in a funny way, and there is some humor in the whole framework because there's some humor in LSD, which is another point. LSD is funnier than those other medicines. It is. And what does that tell us? What does that tell us about humor and the sacred? What does it tell us about humor and modernity? What does it tell us about humor and modern consciousness? I think it says a lot. So. But thanks for that question, because I think about that a lot.
Thanks for the answer.
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. That was great. I have a question that goes maybe slightly outside of the scope of your book, but here in the Netherlands, we have the honor of being pretty much the #1 MDMA producer in the world, right?
Fascinating. And okay.
Tablets from the Netherlands often have these like hyper-capitalist types of iconography, right? Like Louis Vuitton, Heineken, all of these large international companies. Could you maybe speculate as to why these MDMA tablets seem to gravitate more towards this sort of capitalist iconography, whereas with LSD we see imagery like this?
That's interesting. That's a good question. I mean, there are some examples of corporate logos on acid. I know there's some Golden Arches, Prudential Life Insurance. They're all funny, The funniest one is there's a character, I don't know if you had him over here, a Procter & Gamble made detergent, and they have a cartoon character named Mr. Clean, and he's a genie, whatever, so it's kind of cool. So there's Mr. Clean on your acid, and you're like, this is really clever, because it's like, it's a cartoon, it's a genie, and Mr. Clean is like, this is clean LSD. So it actually is advertising, making a claim about the particular quality of the product. And what sort of seems different is that part of what the acid blotter makers were doing is that they were playing with, not trying to hide the fact that this thing they were doing, part of it was ideological, part of it was sacred, part of it was criminal activity, and part of it's commercial. Part of it is making an event, having to deal with money. And so it's stained in a way that they kind of play with sometimes by goofing on the corporate quality of it, or calling it blue cheer after a detergent. That there's a kind of humor about that. Now it feels like that irony has kind of disappeared, and it's almost more just like the potency of a pure floating corporate logo. So it does seem like that there is a difference, but I think you could overread it a little bit and say that LSD inculcates a certain kind of irony, maybe a sacred irony, maybe a critical irony about the construction of consciousness of the world, of society as it is. And MDMA is not, that's not really what its bag is. You know, it's doing something that more immersive and fusional, a more kind of emotional yes to the sort of connection of everything. And so perhaps it has less room for the kind of critical edge that these blotters have. All right, I think our last question for now.
You think people actually make money with LSD?
It's an interesting question.
Because, okay, I mean, brands up, make a crown, cool, yes, let's go. Acid, in my opinion, I don't think nobody ever got rich.
Yeah, the rich is that's the interesting part, is people definitely made money off of it, and they definitely were able to only do that. But in terms of getting rich, some very upper level people would get rich. People who had access to the starter could sell the starter for a fair amount. But I don't know the detail. As I say, it's lore. You know, I can say this is my impression from talking to this set of people. This set of people over here will have more. Clearly, there's been an emphasis throughout the whole thing of making it very affordable. It was always about selling it in bulk. You know, one of the other features about LSD is that it's pretty much impossible to make a small amount of LSD. So that means that you have all this material, and the goal is to get it out, distribute it, disseminate it. It's not about like, let's bring the price point up on this individual hit as far as possible. It's like, no, that's not the logic. The logic is to get it flowing, to get it out there. So,
about sharing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely, and definitely many people did it, gave it away in the 60s, and then they kept the price incredibly low. It's been an incredibly stably priced. You know, now it might, with some inflation, maybe it's more $7 or sometimes even 10, and that's okay, whatever. But it's still within a very small, inexpensive range. So that's my impression, is that some people make money, but mostly not. Well, yeah. Oh, yeah, very complicated to create.
There's no money.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the second part of our evening. I want to introduce onto the stage two folks I got to meet. Well, I just got to meet them in person right now. Ed Visser and Erwan Roux. Come on up. So we will find out in a moment, but Ed is a old school blotter maker, retired now. And can you get up? Yeah, you get up over here.
I have to go to the toilet.
Okay, then go to the toilet. That's fine.
There's something to share.
Oh yeah. That's right. So as Ed goes to the toilet, we have a gift. This is the first of two surprises for the evening. The gift will be distributed to you, which is a single hit, undipped, sorry guys, of some classic blotter that Ed made. And I'm not sure which pieces we're going to use, but that should be fun. I also wanted to say that if there's a little bit of time at the end, they'll probably kick us up soon, but if you can come up here, and there's a folder with some of Ed's work that you can take a better look at than the images that I have, and then you can see some of the materiality and the tactical, there's a very tactile quality to blotter that you kind of miss when you're just seeing the images. But now I'm going to come over here. Yeah. All right. Okay. So I want to hear you a little bit about your story. Ed's coming back, but two things. One, you are a collector, and here, get on here. So you're a collector, and that fascinates me, and I'd like to hear a little bit about how that started to develop. And then part of your interest in it led to meeting Ed and starting the Amsterdam Blotter Company, which you guys are doing now. So.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. Thank you, Erik, for having us. My name is Erwan. I started collecting blotter years ago. How did it start? Once I came across this guy at a festival, and he was selling LSD, and he had this page, which is pretty rare. He was almost on his entire form, because most of the time people are carrying panels or tabs and all. And so I got to look at the whole picture, and I was like, that's a beautiful design. It was actually Randall Roberts, his Guy Fawkes. So on my way back home, I check it out, anonymous Guy Fawkes and all, and I see the whole picture. Then I realized you could actually buy the blotter itself, make exactly the same way, perforated, of course undipped, and signed by the artist. It cost me $40 at that time. And I started to collect it, and then I got it, oh wait, but there's some design I remember of for back in the day, so I started Googling it and all, and I figured out there was an old scene about the blotter and people selling them and all, and I started to get fascinated about the stories. I mean, this is a reason we're united us tonight. Your book is called The Untold Stories, and this is exactly what I got fascinated with the blotter art collection, is to get the stories. And then there was a moment I became a very privileged collector when the master, when it comes to printing, that goes by the name of Head Visser, kindly opened his books and the boxes that he'd been treasuring for all these decades, literally. And then I just find out his formidable legacy, and I was like, Ed, we got to do something. We cannot, you cannot keep these books again. We got to bring it to light. So together we created Amsterdam Blotter Classics. So we sell some designs, but most of it, what we're really into, is the same as you, is to tell the stories. So that's what we do, because as you said, there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of rumors, urban legends, and also we just try to tell the stories of Ed. So
wonderful, that's great. Ed, of course, there's so many ways into this story, but I'm just going to say, when did you begin? Talk a little bit about what you were doing when you started. You had the offer or the kind of situation. How were you already involved with printing, and how did you feel about Blotter from the perspective of someone who was already doing creative print?
Yeah, everything starts on the place, and it was the place I was working in Amsterdam. I had a small printing shop, and we were printing for Paradiso, for clubs, very alternative. And we were approached by an Englishman, something in the beginning of the 80s, and he had a sheet with 500 witches on it, and he needed perforated. I directly understand what he wanted, because I was using it when I was younger. So that's where I started. So I had to make a grid with 500 witches by hand, because it was in the time before the computer. And I have to measure it very precisely, because it was 8 millimeter. So I was really working on it. I had to make a special knife with perforation. And I've been doing that from when I was 14 years old. So I knew how to do it. It was not a surprise. It was easy for me to do it. And I was handy in doing it. And so I did the first run for him, first 100 sheets. So this witch, I only have kept one sheet from it. It's a very valuable sheet. Even Mark McCloud, who have 30,000, didn't have one. We use it as a logo these days, because it was a good thing. The story from the witch was also it could fly. So it was pointing to LSD more or less. So the witch was good. And so I made 100 sheets for him. He came from England, and he had to start the whole thing. So I was at the beginnings to start with him. And the next run was already 2 colors, Popeye. If you look at Popeye, you think... So that was the wink to LSD also. And that run was 200 already. Because he was getting really in the market. And then we start a sheet with psychedelic figures, and I start to print on it. Because I'm also a screen printer. And the thing of screen printing is, everything you make, and it's good, it will be copied the next day. But having it in offset print and with silkscreen print, I overruled them. And I've been doing that all the time. And we saw the image I made from the bike ride in 1993 as an homage to Albert Hofmann. I think the thing was copied a few weeks later. I was phoned by a colleague, a printer. He said, I'm printing your work. I said, my God, let me see. And really, they bought a sheet. And they were copying me. And the strange thing is, in a world of LSD producers, that you think, there's a phrase from Bob Dylan, if you live beside the law, you have to be honest. And it really struck me that they didn't do that. They were copying. And if you look at Bike Ride on internet, you find it on T-shirts, you find it on caps. It's in 1,000 different products. The Bike Ride is the most copied thing in the world. And I'm proud of it. I could not. I was underground. They didn't want. I didn't want to be. I'm sitting here, but maybe I should not be sitting here.
Prescription. Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the things.
But I'm not the real Ed Visser.
Yeah, that's it. Veils. So just to clarify, I'm not sure everyone understood that in response to the fact that the birthday bike rider was getting copied, you decided to combine, or you combined offset printing of the image with special screens. So it was sort of like the way that we treat currency today, where currency isn't just printed; it needs to have special things in it to mark its authenticity. And I think you really led the way on that one.
Yeah. Finally, we were there, and people want the one with the silk screen. And I also changed the silk screen, because there might be somebody who wants to skill silk screen also, but we didn't find any piece of that. So there are thus very special blotters with silk screen on it. Mostly everybody was printing in offset. And we have a little film, eh?
Yeah, we should show the film.
We can show how it was done. And it's still done. This is the way how to do it. So everybody who has an interest,
take notes.
Have a look. Take note. Yeah, it's not easy, eh? Silk screen printing and offset. There is sound. Printing press.
Okay, imagine.
Cutting the paper. It has to be industrial, because we were not only making 100. On a certain moment, we were making 1,000. Because they went all over the world from Amsterdam. Dipped, undipped. Oh, the offset printing press. It's a two-color press. Red and black. The sheet is laying here. If you want to have a closer look later. The perforation knife, you see? And that has to be done in a very old machine in Heidelberg platenpress. Built in 1950, like me. So now it's perforating. makes a beautiful noise. Ready?
Yes. Thank you. I wanted to ask both of you a question which I thought a lot about, which is what makes a particularly great blotter design? Are there some things you see?
Well, I guess it's to everybody's appreciation. I don't think there's a proper answer, but there are codes, though, that Ed will rely on. Because when it comes to vanity, some people now, they put up some kind of design, but one of the code is like, it has to be recognizable from a single tab is a tricky one, unless you really have but at least from very few tabs, you need to know what it relates to, because that's the whole idea about the imagery, is to be recognizable. So there are codes like this. Try not to make it boring, but try to make it recognizable from a single or a double tab thing. So that would be one of that makes a design interested, that does a job basically, and also looks pretty. And for this, it's to everybody's appreciation. But Ed, you want?
It's like a mark brand, like a Coca-Cola logo. You know, a trademark. You knew which source it come, what kind of quality LSD it was, and you wish the strength, because there were more people on the market. So if you buy, for instance, a Gorbachev, you know the people from the Gorbachev. They were reliable, they had a good price, the LSD was pure. So that was the pity that other people were fooling around with our pieces. So, and the thing is, everybody had his own brand. And that keeps the thing alive and easy to know where it comes from. And I like when you have a piece of paper from a blotter, that you know from which sheet it comes. So you know which source it was. And that's my designs are always made like that.
Yeah, I think, for example, the sunflowers that we saw, what I like about that is that, I mean, one way to make sure that the design is visible on a small scale is to just repeat, on a tiny little image in a grid. But the sunflowers, that's a whole single image, but you kind of know what it is because it's just a field of sunflowers. So it's a way of getting that multiplicity with a single image rather than just, repeated. But the question about brand is a really interesting one because in a way they are brands and some images lasted for a long time. Like red dragons were very popular and long-lasting. But in other ways, the images change a lot. And there's not really a equivalent of an intellectual property regime that's going to be able to keep people from copying. And they always copied. There were always this thing about copying. So it's like a brand, but it's something else, too, because it changes so fast. It's not like my, Tylenol, it just looks the same in the last 20 years. But while I might get the Gorbies for a few years, something else happens after that. So it's like a brand, but not in the same way that we think about brands. This is how I ended up kind of thinking about it. But it's what do you think? How do you think about these images? What are they? Like it was like what's the point of these images?
I like to see them. They're like a cover of an album. You know what I mean? Like you can download the music itself and you get the treat, but the cover gives some kind of soul to the album, doesn't it? And I like to think for LSD Blotter, the imagery kind of give it a soul or something, like a cover basically. And just one thing I'd like to add about the copies and all, we were talking about it. The funny part is you like to think, it's just a piece of paper that is printed. I could copy it, nobody would see any difference. Not only I've never been able to spot any repro from Ed's work that is anywhere close to the original, But I actually dare anybody to try to copy the work and just sell it as an original. I mean, it would never be full, you know, because there's so many anomalies always when it comes to the inks, the paper, the perforation. Again, as you could see, it's a very old machinery. There's no digital setting in it. And so anybody with a fancy inkjet thing at home, it will never get anywhere close to the texture, to the inks, the paper. Nothing is available anymore. And to run this, you need serious knowledge. So that's a funny part about blotter art collecting, is like with a single look. Some people, hey, I've got that one. Do you think it's an original? From a single look, you can tell whether it's an original. From the printing techniques themselves. If you look at the Fire loop, you will see some mostly dots. They are the 4-color differentiation. A lot of headworks, not all of them, but most of them are plain colors to give them the really, really density in there. So, yeah. It's not easy. It looks easy to fake, but it really isn't. So that's just what I wanted to add about.
Yeah, it's interesting because that whole world is not formalized. Like the knowledge that you're just talking about, the ability to recognize these differences. It's not like there's like a professional out there whose job is to do that, you know? It's only kind of in the information. Then there's other people who are collecting who have no idea about that. They don't know they're getting inkjet. So there's this, it's a very strange, when Vanity Blotter happens, it's a very strange world because there's not really anybody organizing or making sure that it's high quality. And so it's this whole range of qualities and images.
But the thing in Holland was, we had that special old Dutch paper, which was specially made for the old fountain pen, and it was absorbing like hell. And the producers loved it. And we used it for over 14 years. And some brands of marks stayed for several runs. But like you said, the batch didn't come every month, but it come and then it didn't come for a year. So next year you could use the same image again. So sometimes an image was running for 20 years, 30 years, if the people were still available, fit and enthusiastic to do it.
Wonderful. Let's see. What else would I ask about? What do you think do you think that Blotter will achieve any more? Like what happened with psychedelic rock posters in the early 1970s, even into the 1980s? They were pretty inexpensive. There were collectors, but there was no organized market. There wasn't a sense it was valuable. And then it was really constructed with publications and curators and became kind of thing. And now the pieces fetch quite a lot. Do you think that something like that will happen with Blotter? Or is it just going to stay this very interesting kind of marginal collector zone?
I'm not sure really. I wonder myself what's going to happen with the Blotter art market in a way. It was kind of acknowledged as a real art market. Well, in my opinion, it's a form of street art, basically. That's what it's about. That's why I'm fascinated about it in many ways. Again, the story, the design, because they're not meant to be seen again in their original form. So that's what I find exciting about it. But it became a art form because when the price also became irrational in a way. That's what defined art, was a big debate. But I mean, now there are undipped sheets like we had. I mean, the first one we put on auction, sometimes we only have one spare one, for instance. We put it on auction and it sold for 3,500 euro, which is a bigger amount of money than, and it doesn't even carry the substance, right. You know what I mean? So this is the moment that people say, wait a minute, this is a serious art form. Yeah. In a way, it sells more without any magic in it. So I think there is a transmission because it's still a niche. And as you said, yeah, there's no organization behind to say this is original. There are few reliable, like ourselves, retailers. But for the rest, it's more of a transmission. I mean, when a sheet I figured out over the years, a sheet is really rare people make sure he end up in a good hand, and not always also to the one who has the biggest account. And I think the worst thing could happen is like some guys from the city banks in London figure out, oh well, it's a good speculative thing, and then they start buying, and then they start putting big bucks on it, and then put them in some safe at the bank. You know, that would be the worst case scenario. What I hope that is going to keep on happening is this transmission wheel of passionate people that want to tell the real stories behind, as Mark McLeod couldn't put it any better, those little symbols from a secret society, basically, because this is what it's about.
Yeah. On the idea of the symbol from a secret society, Ed, can you give me some sense of like what the scene was like early on when you first started participating in the acid scene in the Netherlands? Like the sense of I don't know, like there was a desire to put a particular stamp on it, or to, you know, your imagery is clearly not American. Whether there was like a spirit that felt special about this place and the way acid culture was here, maybe in contrast to the UK or the US. Was there something a little bit from the Dutch secret society?
It was secret. Now, it was so secret that a lot of people from England came over here, and Acid Erik came over from the States. He is an Englishman. He had problems with getting his blotters printed, because some printers were smart enough to recognize what they were doing and didn't want to print. They didn't want to get involved because the laws in the States were heavy on that kind of things. So there is here a friendly atmosphere in Amsterdam at that time for people who were dealing in drugs. It was not that heavy. They had find easily homes in that time. You won't believe it, eh? But they had money. They had some money. They were not the richest people of the world. I never saw funny watches. I never saw big cars. I never saw weapons. The only weapon I saw was a knife to cut bread. They were really friendly, easygoing people. Yes, they could live from it. Yes, they could travel. And the atmosphere in Amsterdam was relaxed in that time. We could do a lot. We could go our own way. We could make our own fun. They had relations with Roux. Now, that was a good scene for the LSD also. And they distributed all over Europe. Eh? It went to, there is a magazine in Spain who made the top 10 in 1993 of blotters. And there are 8 from Amsterdam. So the quality was good, the price was good, and the people were good. The atmosphere was good.
Sounds fun. All right. Well, what I'd like to do now is to, again, open it up to questions for these gentlemen or for me. We can continue the conversation. So I don't know if there's a mic that you want to...
Yeah, for Erik. You briefly mentioned in the beginning the difference between screen printing, safeldruk, and offset. But I was wondering, we saw the video, and that was about offset. But can you tell something about, did you ever use screen printing? Because, yeah, coming from Amsterdam, we all know safeldruk, Paradiso, the original, the beautiful posters. So, I know where you're coming from. But can you say something about, the way you used screen printing?
I used it. Sorry. We saw the print with, I think, blue and red, the long one with the stars. And that thing was completely printed in silkscreen. And I was just fooling around in the printery. I made 50. He sold it for 3,500. He's my friend. But I never knew I could make money of it, because it was all laying in my house, you know. I'm a keeper. I'm the conservator of the Paradiso posters because I keep things. My whole house is stocked with things, you know. And I keep those blotters also. But what I did was printing just small things. I printed at the back, for instance, the thing is laying here, Catafix, the nice magician. I printed at the back 200, just to let people know what the strength was. I printed at the back the formula of LSD. And just to give it an extra mark. Is that an answer on your question? You're welcome.
Hi. On dozens of blotters that I've seen on the back, or if it's even white, there's like a stain on it. Like, imagine that it's stripped, and then because something happens, there's a stain. Is that because of the specific ink used, or the specific way of laying the blotter? Why is there a stain often?
Well, actually, this is a good question because it breaks the neck of a urban legend that I use also in my old days, and those double-sided blotters. They were, for whatever reason, said to be double deep, double dose, because they were double. It was never, it's an urban legend. The reason why is they were double-sided, it was to cover those stains, because LSD, as Erik said, came as a crystal form, and if people don't do the chromatography, the last phase to clean up, and to get it's a dark crystal. And when people were dipping, then you end up with like those brown stains at the back. And they're not very aesthetical. So for that reason, sometimes, well, okay, I got this crystal, can you please double-side the pattern so we won't show those stains? So they were never double deep, double dose. They were deep ones, you know what I mean? So the reason the stains is exactly because the crystal was not clean. It doesn't mean it's not potent, but it's not, completely clean. That's the reason.
Thank you. Excellent explanation.
So in the Netherlands, LSD derivatives are legal and produced overground, not underground. And some of them also have art on it. Some of them are also just blank or have written 1p LSD and stuff like that. And I would maybe compare it to like legal graffiti, which is also less fun than the underground graffiti. So I guess my question is, should we be worried that this kind of art is fading out?
Well, I mean, what I'll say, I definitely want to hear from these folks, is that in a way it already went through this transformation with the shift to vanity blotter. So in a way that something like that has already happened. And of course, the thing about vanity blotter is depending how it's made, even though it's intended to be not dipped, if it's made well and it's not too thick with ink, it actually will work pretty well. So suddenly you actually change the kind of dynamic around street blotter. Definitely people still make street blotters. There's a number that are inside the book that are like more recent, that are made for laying crystal and only for that, and they don't get sold in the vanity market. But there's this kind of blur between these different worlds. So in a way, it's already kind of changed. And it's also difficult because sometimes blotters, like at a festival or something, they'll be sold as LSD, and they don't even have, not even an LSD derivative, but they'll have a bromo, or they'll have something that's much more hard ass, and sometimes people get in trouble. So the connection between acid as the drug on the blotter has kind of broken down, so that a printed blotter doesn't necessarily mean LSD as much as it once did, and that's a kind of course a kind of health concern. But in terms of these other blotters that are used for street drugs that are technically unscheduled, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about that. Anything? Do you guys have something to say?
No, it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a good answer.
All right. Okay. Woo! Yeah, I'm doing okay.
And we can say something about Erik and the way it will go with blotters. Yeah, with this kind of books, it will go farther. It will stay. And people will get interested in it and get knowledge. But the thing is, with our blotters, I kept this blotters been sent all over the world. I kept some because everything was been eaten. They eat everything, you know. But I kept some things, you know. But when there was a batch of LSD, they phoned me and they said, "Ed, can you come tomorrow?" Come tomorrow. I had to make a design, print, everything. So I kept things in stock. But if you keep things in stock, people you never see them back. Something happens, people get in jail, people get crazy, people die, you never know. So they left me with some stock. I'm happy. I'm happy with it. But that's why so some people didn't believe that there were so much beautiful blotters from the 80s and the 90s in Amsterdam. They said, these guys are fooling. No, these guys were keeping, especially me. And then I met Erwan, and he told me how you can do that in the big world. So we have fun. We have fun.
Yeah, Mark McLeod has some wonderful stories about getting material, because it's I don't know if there's another example of this. He was sort of like an undercover collector, because he starts out as a collector and an enjoyer, and then he enters the world and he starts producing first other people's designs, and then he starts making his own designs, which have their own very Mark kind of character. But all the while, he's partly using his new status to meet more people who have material that he can borrow, or to take. And so he'd get, like, someone would have like an old guitar case in their closet, and it had, blotters from the mid 1970s, and they go, "Oh yeah, we got to get this to Mark McLeod." Or a well-known acid dealer who did a little bit of time said, "Hey, Mark, someone's going to show up with a garbage bag sometime in the next couple of weeks. Just pay them whatever they ask." And so they'd bring like this garbage bag filled with all of these things that people had kept. There's one a batch that he has because the printer was told by the producer to destroy it all for reasons of street politics, and he said, they were so beautiful, I couldn't do it. So he just kept them hidden for years, and then he was like, I just got to give them to Mark. So Mark has sort of became this person who had all these interesting ways to get these chunks that had survived after all the time. But really the best method that Mark had for not eating the LSD was to put them behind glass. Then it's just too much of a pain. And one other little fun thing about his artifacts, if you go to San Francisco, reach out you'll find it. He loves chatting with people and showing his collection. Is that when the second time he was arrested, they confiscated everything in his house. It was a major bust. They were surveying him for months, and it was luckily that he didn't wind up in prison, which is a whole story I tell in the book. But when they took all his framed blotter, and then they put little strips of tape on them and numbered them all, so for evidence. And then eventually, when he was released, they had to give everything back. They didn't give him everything back. He didn't get his gels back. He didn't get some of the tablets back. He didn't get some of the signed Albert Hoffman ones back, so they kind of screwed him. But they did give him most of his material back, but he kept the stickers on them. So they all have the little labels. And he's like, no, it's just part of what it is. That's the story, and it's the story. It's the story. And the way in which these things end up being stories is kind of one of my favorite things. Like in a way, like a peak acid moment is maybe non-narrative. It doesn't have a story you can grab. It's an experience. You can't describe it. It's ineffable. But at the same time, LSD is just full of stories. People, you learn the stories of the lore. You know about Timothy Leary or Doc Ellis or Orange Sunshine. There's a historical kind of density to the culture that's very, very interesting. And then Blotter just takes it into a whole other kind of order of memory. I mean, some people have been looking at this book and they're like, it's like a photo album. Like I remember that show, and it's kind of fun to watch. We got maybe time for one other question. Yes, sir.
So you're just talking about Blotter being signed by Albert Hoffman.
Yeah. There were in the late 90s, people started to get blotters signed by famous psychedelic people, and they became kind of collectible items. And some of probably the most highest priced blotters on the market have been because of the signatures, like they have Albert Hofmann and Tim Leary. There's a classic one that has those two, and so that's adds another kind of layer. But it's kind of funny because it's like, oh, it's a piece of art that's signed. It's just not signed by the artist. It's signed by somebody who's in the scene, So it's a great move. So we've reached kind of the end of this part of the evening. Now we have a special surprise for you. I want to introduce you to my good friend Ferdinando, who is an Italian stage magician and an old friend. We have had many long conversations about magic and psychedelics and technology and weird art. And so he has a little performance for us. Ferdinando. Yeah, let's see what he wants us to do. Should we get off the stage here? Is that it's easy? Yeah, sure. Then we can watch it.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Erik, will you stay here for a second?
Yes.
Thank you, guys. So I don't need the mic. So thank you for allowing me this couple of minutes of an experiment. Let's call it.
Yes, an experiment.
And you don't know what's going to happen.
No, I don't know.
So as Erik said, we are good friends, and I am a big fan of his work. And I just have been diving into this. This is a terrific book, and there are no copies today.
Sorry,
but there will be available at Cocopelli in the next few days, or you can buy it anywhere you see fit. It's a terrific book, but again, my opinion is skewed. So Erik, just because you also don't know what's going to happen,
right?
And again, it's legit, right?
Yeah, I really don't know.
So what I did here, I wrote all the names of all the blotters that are present in the book. So just make sure, again, you are acting as like people's, read just a few of them.
Sure.
Like Blue Dove, like
Blue Dove, Third Eye Smiles, Far L and Fast Phantasmals, Blue Unicorn, King Tut, Ratnasambhava, Nick Sand, Doc Ellis,
Tripping, Ganesha, Opus,
yes,
Rainbow Gathering, Red Blue Stars, Alien Embrace, right?
Mystery of Faith, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are all the blotters, all the names. Some of them are kind of known. Some of us are.
We just made up. Mark made up. It's like it was a little note. It's like, sorry guys, we're just doing our best. This is not like.
So this is the full list of all the blotters that are contained within the book. Fair.
All right, fair.
And we are going to randomly choose one.
Okay.
In a way. Let's do it this way. Cinzia, Marta is that your name? We just met a few minutes ago, and you don't know what's going to happen. Can you just point to someone else behind you? Anyone that you want. Any person that you feel somehow called to, or someone that you like, or someone that you dislike. It's up to you. Hello, your name is?
I'd rather not say my name.
Okay, so you can also point to someone else to partake, because we are searching for someone who is willing to come on stage. Which one? The lady? Is that okay with you? Hello, what is your name? Marisa, do you want to play?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what's going to happen. Erik, you can hold the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have Marta and Marisa. Marisa, we need to choose one of these. I'm going to go very slowly, and then you call stop anywhere.
Stop.
Here.
Yes.
So this set. So let's take whatever you asked for. So there are a few names, Erik, and you can read, Orange Sunshine, album covers, Blue Flogging, Plunk, all different. Celtic Coin, Celtic Lotus. Marisa, now we are going for the final piece. So that this will be undoubtedly your final choice. I'm going to go with the scissors, and you tell me stop anytime.
Stop.
And I can also go back and forth. It's up to you. I want you to be happy.
Stop.
Here. I'm going exactly where you asked me, I'm going to cut. Yeah? Oh, sorry. So, this is the thing. We selected a piece which now we are going to read. You stumble upon something. And Marta, before we started, I asked you to think about the number. What is the number you're thinking of?
59.
59. Would you come on stage, please? An applause for a volunteer. Thank you for helping. Marta, take a look at this. So this is where you decided to cut. What do you read?
Should I say it?
Yeah, out loud.
Bike rider.
Bike rider, which is the one created by Ed. That's a nice thing. That's a nice coincidence. Bike rider. Fair?
Yes.
Among all the many different names that you chose. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So, Marta, what is the name you've been thinking of?
The number?
Yeah.
59.
59. Erik, will you please open the book at page 59?
59.
And let's see what is there.
Oh, 59. Well, my friends. Wow.
Isn't magic wonderful?
Yeah.
And I have a final thing, which has kind of been on the stage since the beginning, so I was trying to capture the vibe here. And there is a final surprise, which this is what Bike Rider looks like. And there is an extra twist. This is dipped. So whoever wants this, you can have it. Thank you. This is for you. Thank you for playing.
Thank you. All right, folks. I can't believe it. We actually made it sharply on time. So this was really fun. And again, I apologize for not having books, but otherwise we'd have to sit here for 45 minutes signing books. But I won't be able to sign them. However, you will be able to get your hands on them. And once again, thanks so much, and thanks to everybody here to put it on. It was really great. Everybody was really supportive, and it worked out really well. Really appreciate it. So, our guests, it was a great night. Thank you.